situation. I think it also indicated that we live in quite difficult times also in terms of economic projections, and each economist would tell you this, including the central bank colleagues. Of course, this economic recovery has a number of aspects, but also one of the important points is, and why actually the European Union also tried to see how the recovery can be boosted, was also that the response in member states was very uneven, which could risk of distorting the internal market, because the financial capacities of member states were different. So that's why these measures also at the level of European Union are very important. So what has been granted and what kind of measures have been taken? Maybe some of you have noticed that first of all, in terms of budgetary flexibility, there is a general escape clause from the Stability and Growth Pact, which means that the strict budgetary deficit rules are made much more flexible. And we see that member states have been raising their expenditure, which naturally would lead to increased budget deficits. Second, state aid. Over the half a year, the Commission has granted billions and billions of support where member states have been requesting to approve the state aid. Also, at the very beginning of the crisis, Commission already, and also other European institutions, provide certain support measures, like the SURE instrument of 100 billion euro loans to member states when they needed to support the labor market, for example. And also ECB measures with a firepower of 1.3 trillion euros. And then we come to the recovery plan for Europe. So in the course of summer and after requests by both European Parliament and European leaders, the Commission came up with the proposal. And in July, member states, the leaders agreed on the next MFF, which also includes the 650 billion so-called Next Generation EU, where the cornerstone is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, about which I'm going to talk to you. So this 1.74 thousand billion, or roughly 1 trillion euros, is the long-term MFF for 21-27, and additional funds of 750 billion euros will be triggered and will be channeled to the economies of member states. The question could arise where the money is coming from. It's also quite unprecedented in terms of volumes that European Commission, on behalf of member states, will borrow the funds into international markets, and the repayment period will be long, so it's long money, starting from 28 and finishing at 2058. So this is how this funding will be raised. And of course, I should also say that this Recovery Resilience Facility is also subject to agreement of the EU institutions, where negotiations are still ongoing. And also in some member states, this revenue ceiling raising also subject to ratifications in national parliaments. So in terms of budgetary allocations, the Commission has proposed and member states have agreed to a total budget of 672.5 billion. Actually, Commission proposed a bit higher figure for grants, but this is the outcome of the negotiations. So 312 billion euros will be available for member states in grants, and 360 billion euros will be available in form of loans. And in terms of grants, primarily this should be seen as grants to member states, 100%. But then, of course, when the actual programs will come, most probably it's not going to be 100% to particular enterprises where the programs are implemented. But primarily, this is 312 billion as grants to member states. And the expectation is that it will deliver 2% of additional GDP by 2024 to member states, to EU economy, and create 2 million jobs. And this is, in a way, relatively short-term money because the funds will be available and should be committed already in 2021, 22, 23, with payment period finishing somewhat around 2026. So then the question comes, what member states should do in order to get the money? Well, I mean, there is nothing new. There is a need to prepare another plan because, as you know, for example, structural funds, the member states have also been preparing their plans or operational programs. This is a bit probably adopted, but anyway, the member states are drawing up their national plans. So they're called National Recovery and Resilience Plans, and start to negotiate with the European Commission. And in parallel, all the decisions are being taken at the European level in terms of approving this facility. And the Commission has already recommended, and actually we call it informal consultations before the legislation is in place, are already ongoing on where and how this funding would be implemented in member states. So Commission is already open for debates, discussions, etc. And then the plans will be reviewed in terms of how they address the reforms, because here is a clear linkage with the European semester process, so meaning the reforms within the coordination of economic policies, where each year member states have been receiving country-specific recommendations in different, let's say, policy fields where there has been a need for reforms. And what is also very important, and my next two slides will also cover this, that the plans should also cover the measures on how the funding will contribute to green and digital transition, because that has been put as top priorities for Commission and also for EU economic recovery overall. And also an important element is also to strengthen the growth potential, and since the fund is also has the title of resilience, so how we would transform our economies that they are resilient to the future crisis. So as I said, the first big priority is supporting the green transition, because as you know, one of the key and headline priorities of von der Leyen Commission is Green Deal and increased climate ambition. So we will see when this increased climate ambition is, let's say, adopted, but it's going to be discussed in December European Council by the leaders. But the ambition is to decrease the CO2 emissions not by 40% by 2030, but by 55% as put forward by Commission. And of course, if you analyze the Green Deal, there are many elements that are connected to national economies on how and what measures could be taken in order to decrease the CO2 emissions, starting from agriculture and ending with biodiversity, decreasing pollution, etc. And the Commission has proposed, and it's going to be implemented, that each plan and the funding overall should contain 37% for this green objective, so 37% in funding measures and programs. And also important element is that that the funding should not do significant harm. So this principle is also applied to the expenditure. So no significant harm, for example, to the nature, as example. Second, supporting the digital transition, where there are a number of elements, improving connectivity, help citizens to develop digital skills, deploy cutting-edge technologies, improve cybersecurity, you name. So all priorities that are within, let's say, European competitiveness when it comes to digital age are encouraged to be covered under this priority. And again, there has been a proposal and requirement that 20% of the national plan should be devoted, funding should be devoted to this, let's say, digital priority. And then, of course, you can look at different, let's say, assessments on what are the needs in member states. For example, one of the indicators or one of the assessments is so-called DESI index, Digital Economy and Society Index, where there are a number of measurements how member states have been assessed in terms of uptake of the digital technologies in economy, digital skills, connectivity, public digital services, etc. So I think there you can also, in a way, try and find answers where, for example, Latvia should invest more for this priority. And the third is this strengthening of economic and social resilience. So here we also speak about ensuring that our health systems and healthcare services can withstand this crisis and also be, let's say, more resilient in the future. And of course, we see that this situation in short-term or operative situation in member states has been severely deteriorating, including also Baltic states. The Commission also has put forward, well, in terms of funding priorities, flagship areas. So it's not kind of, let's say, compulsory, but I think it's more like in terms of funding, let's say, suggestions where the funding could be also allocated. So it's the clean technologies, it's energy efficiency in buildings, it's sustainable transport, it's increase the broadband services, so to reaching those who probably can't access broadband yet, public administration and its digitalization, data cloud capacities, and of course education and trainings. As flagship initiatives where Commission sees that these are very, very important also for this economic recovery. Also, just food for thought, some of the examples where the funding in those two big priorities could be devoted, but nothing, let's say, compulsory, you know. And I already talked to you about the expected impact of this next generation EU funding. But what is also, I think, important also in terms of economies of member states, especially, I think, small and open economies, that is also helping to sustain this crisis, because we see that there's a lot of budget expenditure, but this funding is investment funding, so it will help to find those areas where fast investments could be done, and also where these investments could generate future revenues, because I think it's also very important in terms of the funding that this funding is not, let's say, funding to deal with current fire, you know, because these are more, I would say, current expenditure, but this funding is more to generate future revenues. So to invest in those areas where there is a great potential. State of play of negotiations. So, well, I already described to you, but currently Member States, Commission, and European Parliament are discussing these proposals together with the overall MFF package in so-called trialogues. We expect the fast agreement, but let's see. We are already beginning of November, and our aim was that the funding and all the, let's say, legal framework is operational from 1st of January next year, which is less than 2 months. And the funding flows are as follows: that after when these resilience and recovery plans are submitted and adopted, member states receive 10% advance payment, and then in subsequent tranches, the member states would receive this funding. Also, when it comes to Latvia, the RRF, how we call it, funding is going to be around 1.9 million euros. If the overall MFF package is around 10.5 billion euros, then almost 2 billion will be for this RRF, because funding for 2022 is fixed already, but for the 2023 will depend on economic data. So 1.6 billion are fixed funding, but the remainder depends on economic data. So more or less, I think we're speaking about close to 2 billion economic stimulus package. So I think I would stop here and be ready to answer your questions. Many thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kuznieks. And now I would like to introduce Mr. Andris to give a view how these priorities that were mentioned, Green Deal, digital transition, social and economic resilience, would be translated in concrete activities in Latvia. Mr. Dalderis is advisor to the Minister of Finance of Latvia, and his areas of responsibility include budgetary issues, taxation policies, and EU structural and investment funds. Mr. Dalderis is a member of the Latvian political party New Unity. He has been a member of the parliament from 2011 to 2018 and has overseen matters concerning EU funds and Latvian National Development Plan. As well as previously, from 2009 to 2010, Mr. Dalderis has served as a Minister of Culture of Latvia. So please, Mr. Dalderis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for so good introduction of my person, and many greetings to American nation for this very special day today. And we are waiting for results everywhere. And really, I am advisor to Minister of Finance now, and we are responsible for this IRF planning process. And it's really very challenging now. I can say it's very short time, and we would like to make this plan as well as good as possible. And that is a problem we have in this time. Parallel with this session, we have a working group meeting with our line ministries about the digital transformation, and it's very, very important. And I take my apologies that I will leave you very soon. And but anyway, now we heard about the position from European Commission, and I can just add that we will try to do as fast as possible our plan, and we are planning it should be done to the last days of this month, and then we'll see how the negotiations will come. This process is really very challenging. I can say many interests, many different views, and as well this is very new process for European Commission as well. And now a not very easy, some I can say very complicated political circumstances in our country as well doesn't help a lot for the fast result. But now we are quite optimistic, and my colleague from Ministry of Finance, Deputy State Secretary Armands Eberhards, will show you the presentation, and he would be ready to answer your questions about the process, about the results. And as I understand, you mostly interested in the measures, what we can, how we can help productive sector of our economy. And that's, of course, mostly the question to Ministry of Economy of Latvia. But at the same time, we are working very close with them, because the negotiation process will be organized by Ministry of Finance as responsible for European funds actions and affairs as well. So thank you for your attention, and I would like to give the floor to Armands, my colleague, and to continue my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Dita. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, in maybe some 15 minutes, lead you through our view, our stance on this RF preparation. And perhaps let me start a little bit with the context information. As the preparation of this plan, next slide please, is not taken out of context. And indeed, in July, the European Council agreed extraordinary measures, as Commission representative already explained, on the Next Generation EU. However, from our perspective, we are seeing holistically all the time frame against all the EU co-financed activities, and therefore we had to see more than 10 billion grant financing to be allocated for various policy measures and objectives. And as one could imagine, that from the finance ministry perspective, we are looking more at the figures first. And clearly, the biggest actually chunk of financing is exactly with not this Next Generation EU, but with MMF, Multi-Annual Financial Framework Program. So, and indeed, as Ins outlined, the finance ministry is given the very huge task of pulling all these different instruments together in various programming documents. And indeed, we are already for more than a year working on the cohesion policy, which is the right-hand side column, this a little bit orange chunk. So basically, that's the cohesion policy or structural funds as we know them. In addition to that, we have a special resource allocated for the Just Transition Fund, and not to be neglected and not to be forgotten that we are as well benefiting for the agricultural policies. And there we have really a very tailor-made support for agricultural sector through the Common Agricultural Policy instruments. So, and at the top of this MMF, as the Commission representative said, in July, indeed, the Council agreed extraordinary additional measures, which would mean in Latvia, we have RRF, which is one specific set of measures, combined with additional support financing for the transition fund, Just Transition Fund, and as well additional measures for Common Agricultural Policy, and not to be neglected, as well for REACT-EU measures. That is really instant response and help to the member state in addressing the current crisis and current difficulties. So, and to be complete on the context of the figures, in addition to those 10.5 billion euros grant funding allocation for Latvia or the next financial perspective, Commission made available as well additional facility for those member states which would be interested in attracting as well the loan financing for almost 2.48 billion euros under the Next Generation facility. So, as a matter of fact, we are aiming to prepare the plans for the whole these 4 set of work streams later this fall, starting from already mentioned the Reform and Resilience Facility Plan, the National Cohesion Policy envelope, as well as modification of the current structural fund program by adding the REACT-EU as well as Just Transition funds. So most probably in the public domain, you would see these 4 main work streams somehow correlated. And why I'm mentioning this is that somehow folks used to sort of mix different EU financing, but it's perhaps interesting to see in the context that yes, sometimes we are talking about different nuances, but these nuances are really significant contributions. Another important thing, and I believe the Commission representative indicated, the Next Generation EU is a sort of short-term measures more than a long-term, because as you can see as well from the overall time frame, the MMF allocations would go for 27 and actually disbursements beyond. So basically, it would allow more breathing space, if you like, for the consumption of these resources vis-a-vis Next Generation EU or RRF, which is more short-term measures and really to be used for next couple of years. So and not to neglect as well, the Ministry of Agriculture is working for the rural support programs, and they are aiming as well to start the program simultaneously already next year. So indeed, this is a very challenging task, but we see that under the leadership of the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister is leading these working groups and working parties, we would be able to ensure that these fundings would be made available as soon as EU level political decisions are made and operationally implemented to get these different instruments up and running. Next slide, please. When we are looking more specifically on RRF, then indeed the guaranteed allocation would be 1.65 billion euros of grant money. And as Commission representative said, the current allocation formula would say that depending on the economic and epidemiological and other circumstances in the member states, the last third of the financing would be allocated at a later stage. However, what is clear that from Latvian perspective, we would like to see our plan ambitions planned in totality, just to make sure that we would know exactly what we would like to do for the whole spectrum range. Why it is important? Because the earmarked allocations for some of the chunks of money is clearly put as well in the legislation. So for the climate-related actions, we have to allocate it the minimum 37%, which roughly speaking would be 740 million euros. For the digital, at least 20%, which would add up for approximately 400 million. So, and the rest indeed would be more up to the member states to come up with a feasible solutions based on various policy contexts. First and foremost, it's country-specific recommendations that would be the Commission's sort of leading views on where those investments would need to go. On the other hand, on the Latvian side, as you may notice, earlier this summer, the Parliament adopted the National Development Plan, as well as various policy papers. So, and therefore, this reform scope would lead us into domains of health, reducing administrative disparities, basically embedding the administrative territorial reforms by providing necessary means for those new regional structures. Then, of course, focusing on the economic transformation and productivity, and last but not least, as well addressing the issues of rule of law. Maybe the order of precedence here does not really reflect the importance of issues per se, but this is just to show you the various domains in which we are thinking. As it's been indicated, currently the preparation of the plan is work in progress. Earlier this year, actually August, the cabinet roadmap for this, and this outline that we are aiming at submission of this plan to the Commission services November this year. We are concluding a number of parallel working parties, actually reflecting each of those priority domains. And as Ian said, as a matter of fact, in parallel, we are working for the digital transformation today, actually agreeing the priorities. And what is important here, that it is not the exercise of the optimal allocation of resources. This is the exercise of agreeing the scope of transition and reforms, because this instrument per se would envisage, and that is as well very clear a message from the Prime Minister, that we would like to use this not as another instrument for supporting an area, but really to use this as a sort of a springboard for achieving more. So basically achieving more of those reform endeavors by supporting investments afterwards. So therefore, at this very stage, we are not really discussing any individual concrete project list per se, because that would come at a later stage. At this very stage, we are discussing the broad reform domains. We are discussing the areas in which those domains would need to be supported by investments, and then afterwards that would be sort of more technical discussion on the individual sort of projects, etc. So, and our ambition is indeed to get a plan as well in parallel, discussed as we are developing it with the Commission services. So basically aiming in November to go to the Cabinet, not just with a very quick and dirty thing, which is sort of a surprise thing for everyone around, but really to get something what would make quite plausible solution as well for the further negotiations with the Commission services. And as a matter of fact, we had already initial negotiations with the Commission services on health and digital. And as we are developing more modules here, we are in addition as well working on the content of those chapters mentioned. Next slide, please. So, and here, just outline of those initial reform proposals and our thinking, where we would see the most priorities to be addressed. And on the climate, indeed, we are aiming at finding solutions for sustainable transport and renewable energy field, really making sure that we would try to come up with a Riga agglomeration transport sort of reform, making it more environmental friendly, and really try to find the means of reducing CO2 emissions at large. And of course, addressing as well some other challenges in this climate change priorities as well in the public and private sector. For the digital transformation, we are really aiming at fostering this digital transformation in public, private, and most importantly as well in the skills areas, supported as well by the G5 infrastructure elements. In health, it's in a way quite evident looking what's happening outside the window, but really we are looking to support the network effectiveness and really to support those measures that would allow us, as Mr. Kuznieks say, to see the catch rather than fish in a long run. So reducing disparities and implementation of administrative reforms, we are looking at broad spectrum of domains, including education, road accessibility, and other social elements as well. And for the economic transition, that's first and foremost to see how we could foster the private sector R&D investments into this field, making sure that we are boosting innovation policies, that we are really linking the entrepreneurship, the private sector with the educational reform, and really seeing more convergence within this domain. And last but not least, the rule of law, perhaps we should put that in the first column, because politically that's perhaps the most crucial thing, is to make sure that we are addressing those recommendations that the Commission said loud and clear, that we have to really tackle the grey economy. We have to foster the transition and capacity of various institutions responsible for the combating economic crimes, and really providing a skill set and tools for those that are delivering on these reforms. The next one, please.
Mr. Eberhards, it would be nice if we could wrap up to allow also some time for questions from our members, if possible.
Perfect. Just 2 minutes. So this would outline more specifically the investment areas in the domains as described. And the next one, please, would show you further steps and time frame. So seeing in context those activities, we are aiming at start of this facility, second part of next year, as soon as the legislator and the Commission services would conclude the negotiations with the member states. And of course, this would mean that the investment selection would be predominantly seen for the readiness of those operations of the project. So basically the maturity would predominantly pave the way for the project activities, as we have to finish all those investments by end of 26. So because we have to demonstrate to the Commission services those milestones in meanwhile, which would be seen as a triggers for payments to the member states. Thank you. I think perhaps that's from my side really the essence of the process and the thinking of the government side. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Dalderis and Mr. Eberhards. Now I will be switching to the questions that have been arriving in our chat. And first of the questions question is around how the mid-sized company can best survive the current market conditions, or the question more specifically is, which of the European Union's and Latvia's recovery policies do you believe will truly speak to private sector leaders as opposed to government policymakers?
How would you like to proceed with the questions and answers, taking them one by one, or
how would you
collective?
prefer? Because I can also give one more then. What is from Mr. Hansen? What are specific innovation policies, if they have been defined and proposed currently in the plan? Maybe then we can start with those two, please.
Beg your pardon, I didn't get the final part of the question, please.
Yes, the one was about the EU's and Latvia's policies that would speak to private sector leaders, and the second was what are specific innovation policies that are, that are put in the plan, or what you are thinking about, maybe already defined or proposed.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with one general remark and then going into the specific question. As the government decided to allocate this task of coordination for the finance ministry, it means that we are doing the preparation of the plan together with the line ministries. And exactly these questions are going into the domain of the Ministry of Economics and the Ministry of Education and Science in a way. And therefore, the line ministries come up with a proposals for those reform agendas back in mid-September. And based on the National Development Plan, based on Working Party by Mr. Wittenbergs and jointly with Mr. Orsleis, they come up with a proposal for the productivity reform. And by the means of addressing the investments in these domains, as well seeing through the energy efficiency, through the digital transformation, and more importantly, the private sector attraction for R&D investments, I believe these would make a combined fields for intervention of this domain. However, what is important that there will be no one single bullet, as we believe. It will be a set of measures combined and coordinated as well with quite a massive investments from MMF in the same areas. And at the moment, as we speak, I mean, we are going through those different chapters and by chapters, seeing where exactly which areas of interventions we could address by which means. And I believe in a couple of weeks there will be more articulated answers on the exact strategies, for example, for the innovation policies or other areas. Thank you.
I would also like to ask Mr. Kuznieks, maybe you could provide also the opinion from the European Commission on those questions. How do you see those policies that would speak with the private sector leaders, and what are the innovation policies that the European Commission has proposed for the next period?
Yes, many thanks, Dita, for the question, for addressing this question. Well, I mean, if you look at, let's say, latest proposals from the Commission that have come out in the course of, I would say, last 12 months since Ursula von der Leyen took the office, then we see, I think, one of the important documents is the new European Industrial Strategy, where the directions have been put out. So I would recommend a colleague also looking into it. That's one thing. Second thing, some of the initiatives, I think, are also targeted towards, let's say, private sector, or in a way to think how private sector could contribute to this green transition, for example. Because, of course, from one point of view, we are putting different kind of, I would say, administrative restrictions, for example, how much we should reduce, I don't know, CO2 emissions, or, I don't know, switch to more green vehicles. But from the other point of view, it's an opportunity so that the enterprises, startups can be looking at those areas where there is a growth potential. And we see that, for example, if we look at this renewable energy and clean energy, then the investments in those sectors in European Union are already outpacing the fossil fuel investments. So I think these are directions where also entrepreneurs could look, and also in close cooperation on what's going on in I would say science domain. So we see good examples in Latvia where enterprises, also big enterprises, together with universities, have been working also on some good innovative products. So I think that's the direction where I think also European economy would be leading. And then also I think what is important is this debate on European strategic autonomy. That's probably more for also in connection with the current crisis, where we experience that many productions were cut because of the shortage of deliveries, for example, from China. And then what's the response? How much we are open as trade partners, but at the same time where we need to develop our own strategic, let's say, capacities, be it production of batteries or anything else, So thank you. I think I would stop here.
Thank you. Then I would continue with two more questions. One question would be that if the AmCham members, entrepreneurs, have concrete proposals for the planned domains that you mentioned, where we can forward them. And second is, could you please elaborate more particularly on the project submission process and timeline in 21?
Thank you, Dita. Indeed, by launching this process, we experienced a very, very, very huge interest from various parties, and the total amount of interested sort of proposals for the investments aiming at 8.5 billion from various public and private enterprises. So the strategy currently is that we are agreeing first reform scope, and as the line ministries, be that Ministry of Economics or Ministry of Education or Health or any other, are formulating those reform agendas and scope, the right addressee for those individual project ideas would be exactly the line ministries. So as ministers are taking personal interest in the preparation of this plan, I believe any interested party would be welcome to express their views on this. However, we have to make sure that when we are addressing the private sector interest, those need to be aligned with the state aid rules and requirements, actually the temporary state aid framework, which would prevent any public use of monies before. So, but from the policy perspective, these are the line ministries. As regard to the time frame, as this instrument is not exactly the same way of instrument as we know so far the structural funds. I mean, this is direct management instrument opposed from the shared management. We are discussing in meanwhile in parallel actually the preparation of the substance of the plan, as well the modus operandi for the operational details. Most probably, once the plan would be agreed, for the open call of proposals, we would follow the structural funds implementation logic. So basically open call, selection procedures, etc., if we are talking about a grant type of operations. If we are talking about the financial instruments, then of course that would be most probably the National Promotional Bank Altums, and they are already active in the market by using and implementing the various government sponsored COVID measures. So they most probably would continue as well with any activities of RRF. So, but we would come up with more clear instruction guidelines as those will be developed earlier next year. Thank you.
Gentlemen, one more question from our side regarding the recovery and resilience facility. As it is intended really to strengthen our national economies at these times. How you would ensure both from the European and Latvian side that these funds are used properly, and in case of a potential project failure, these financial means would be reallocated in the case of necessity as fast as possible? How you would be ensuring this follow-up?
Thank you. Dita, would you like me to start or Andris?
You can
Please,
start,
gentlemen.
Armand.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think three very important things in this. The RRF, per definition, is a little bit different in its architecture in comparison to the structural funds. This is more oriented towards the results rather than process. What we do mean by that is that in a process of negotiation of the plan with the Commission, we would agree triggers or deliverables for various activities, which would be either at the policy level or more sort of economic criteria level. So the Commission clearly indicated that they would reimburse the member states' funds on a biannually basis based on the performance against those deliverables, against those reforms. So that would be in everyone's interest to make sure that we are delivering on our promise, because otherwise we would not be sufficiently happy with the results, as the Commission would not reimburse these funds. Secondly, indeed, this question is very important, as we have to balance our ambitious investments in areas with a specific absorption capacity of the domain in which we are implementing the RRF and MMF activities. Plus, we have to calibrate as well the delivery capacities of the market operators, for example, the construction sector. Yeah, as we have to calibrate that as well with the other activities that were not mentioned here, and make sure that there are no, firstly, gaps in investment, or there are gaps in between the periods, and more importantly, that we are not overheating certain sectors by over demand in areas. And that is another very challenging task, for example, in digital sector, to find a very fine balance there. But I believe once these plans would be articulated and mature enough, and we would start a public consultation, I believe that our general public and experts through the various monitoring and supervision formats would help us as well with the best piece of advice in spotting certain problem areas. Thank you.
Yes, if I may just add what Mr. Eberhards already noted, is that it is indeed a bit different mechanism from the structural funds. But anyway, the financial provisions are prescribed also in draft regulation in detail, how exactly this RRF funding is going to be disbursed, and also what are the terms for halting the funding and releasing again, where rightly Mr. Eberhards mentioned this performance and achievement of set, let's say, objectives. And then, of course, we're all accountable also as any other, let's say, expenditure of the European public taxpayers' money towards all the respective institutions. And I'm sure European Parliament will also have great interest in hearing reports when the money is implemented, how it has been implemented, you know. So I think very clear accountability towards all the respective bodies and also to national institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Maybe the last question, very practical issue that was raised in the chat. Is it okay with you that we would share your presentation with the participants of this meeting?
Yes, absolutely. From our side, it's perfect. Thank you very much indeed for this.
Yes, no problem with us as well. Of course, it's available.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for finding time in your busy schedule to meet with the AmCham members. We really very much appreciate this opportunity. And for our members, I wanted to announce that the AmCham has switched to online program mode once again, and we are envisioning our next events to take place online. And we invite you all to attend our next events. Just to mention a few events in November. On November 11, we will have a discussion on the US election results, moderated by journalist Mr. Paul Strauceps. On November 19, we will have online meeting with the Minister of Economy, Mr. Wittenbergs. As well as on November 19, we will have a World Latvian Economic and Innovation Forum hosted by World Federation of Free Latvians and supported by us, AmCham. Also, one question that I wanted to give you heads up is about our annual Christmas charity event. It will be held in December 10, and it will be this time online. Please join us to celebrate this time together and support our charity. Once again, thank you everyone for joining today. We look forward to seeing you soon at our next events, and please stay safe and healthy. Thank you.